right. Now as we start out in chapter 22, let's go back for a final time here and review just a little bit on what we've got here as far as this is concerned. Wait just a minute right here. I've may even brought in the wrong lesson, did I? No, there's the one I wanted to start with. I just didn't take it off right there. Okay. Let's go back now and review the third missionary journey. And so we take off from what city? Antioch. Up to, where's that arrow? Up to Phrygia. Then up to Galatia, over to Ephesus, up to, where? Troas. Who was he supposed to meet up at Troas? Titus. What book did he write down at Ephesus? 1 Corinthians. And he's supposed to meet Titus up there, but Titus wasn't there, so he goes on over into Macedonia. There he met Titus, and then what book did he write? 2 Corinthians then. And sent it back down with Titus. Then he goes down to Corinth, and now, as he had done before, he intended to do this time, get on a boat, sail straight back, because he's going to go back to Jerusalem. And why is it that he has to go to Jerusalem? He's taking up this collection for the saints down at Jerusalem, so he's got to go down there. Why doesn't he just cut off all that time and head on down? There's a threat on his life. That's right. He found out that they were getting ready to take his life, and so then he turned around, goes back up, and he stopped at what city? Philippi. Who did he pick up? Luke. Comes on over to Troas. There's where they have the Lord's Supper. Then he goes on down to where? Down to Miletus, and calls for the elders at Ephesus. And then he leaves them, goes down to Patara, and from there sails to Tyre, and then on down to Jerusalem. Now, he's down here in Jerusalem, and this is what chapters 21 through 28 are going to be about. We're going to be down there, and we'll head up into Caesarea, but it's going to be down as a result of him coming down here to Jerusalem. So that's where we are right now. So we're going to begin now in chapter 22, and all this will end up with him finally going over into Rome. Now, I'll tell you that he's going to spend 2 years in prison down here at Jerusalem. They're going to send him over to Rome, and he's going to spend 2 more years at Rome. So he's going to spend 4 years in prison. And then the book of Acts will come to its conclusion. So now, let us back up. And as we start out now in chapter 22, Paul has been arrested. Why was he arrested? What was the trumped up charge? You remember? Taking a Gentile into the temple, no truth in it whatsoever. And then the chief captain came rushing down. He wanted to find out the truth, but one side cried one thing, another cried another thing, and so they had to carry Paul over then up into the jailhouse. Now, last week we showed the picture right in here of where it would be in this. If we take a look at the temple, why, here is the way that it would be. That he's there, and so he would be coming out either here or here, in here, and so they carried him around and took him up in here. Now, this up here is the fortress of what? Antonia. That's right. It's the fortress of Antonia. And keep in mind, that is not a Jewish building, that fortress of Antonia. Who does that belong to? Who lives in there? The Roman army. See, they live in there, and so that is their fortress. So they now are going to bring him around up here on these steps. And that is where Paul is getting ready to make his speech. If we look at the model city again, we can look over here, and I think, I thought that I'd drawn some lines there, but I don't guess I have. And so as we look at the model city, why, they would be bringing Paul out right in here, this gate, bringing him down through here, up here, and it's on these steps right here that Paul then turned around and asked the chief captain, may I say something? So there's the city, there's the bigger the steps that we've got in there. So now that's where Paul is, and he's going to be making this speech. The chief captain lets him make the speech because maybe Paul will incriminate himself. Now, let's go very rapidly tonight. In chapter 22, this chapter is going to be reminiscent of chapter 7. Who made the speech back in chapter 7? Stephen. What was Stephen's purpose in chapter 7? What was the one purpose, one sentence in chapter 7? To show he was one of them. Show he didn't hate Jews. See? To show that he was one of the good guys. So he was preaching in that way. Now that's what Paul is going to be doing right here. So he starts out now. It said, when they heard that he had spoken to them in the Hebrew language, they were the more quiet, and he saith. So he started out, I am a Jew. Why would he start out like that? What's the charge? He's desecrated the temple. He's trying to destroy the Jewish religion. He's taught people not to keep the law. This guy's a Jew hater. So he starts out, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, instructed according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, even as you all are this day. Now, here when he mentioned he'd been brought up here at the feet of Gamaliel, would that carry any weight with this crowd? Gamaliel was one of the leaders of the Sanhedrin. And so, I'm a Jew. I was born in another city, but I was brought down here from my youth, and Gamaliel has raised me here. And I was brought up according to the strict manner of the law here. So that's, you see that? I understand what I'm doing. He's throwing all these things in to let them see I am one of you. He said, being zealous for God, even as you all are this day. Why didn't he curse them? I was zealous for God, but you bunch of nimwits, you. His whole purpose is to show, I understand what you're doing. I used to do the same thing. And so I understand why you are disgusted with me, because I did the same thing. Now he's going to tell what he did. And I persecuted this way unto the death. I caused people to die, binding and delivering unto prisons both men and women. And as also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom I received letters unto the brethren, and journeyed to Damascus to bring them that were there unto Jerusalem in bonds to be punished. So I was a guy that I went up to Damascus, and your high priest and the elders will testify to this, because they gave me authority. They gave me letters to go do this. Would this show that Paul was in a high position? How many of you could say that the President of the United States has given you authority and you have letters and so forth to do something? See? And so he's showing that I did this with all the authority here of these men. Now, he's going to be telling the story here. Now, we've already read this story back in chapter 9. Back in chapter 9, Luke tells the story from his perspective. He's just giving us the historical account, the factual account. Here's what happened. Now, Paul is going to be telling the story from his viewpoint. And what is his purpose in telling this story? Why does he repeat it? Is it because he didn't think you learned it back in chapter 9? Why is Paul repeating this story? All right, it's to show them I was an enemy of Christ. See, I was just like you people out there today. I was an enemy of Christ. And let me tell you how I was converted. I didn't just change. I didn't just go along and all of a sudden decide, I believe I'll be a Christian. See? No, let me tell you what happened to me so that these people could understand why he had made this change. Verse 6, and it came to pass that as I made my journey and drew nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. Now, if you compare, and we'll look just briefly in a minute, but if you'll compare chapter 9 with this chapter, you will find that you'll get a few things in this chapter that you didn't get in the other chapter. And you'll get a few things in the other one you didn't get in this one. When people tell stories, the same story, but they tell it for different purposes, they can either add or leave out certain things, can't they? Now, for instance, here, Paul said that it was about noon. So we find the time of day now that it was. Suddenly there shone from heaven a great light around about me, and I fell on the ground. And I heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he saith unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. Now, Paul is showing them why he has changed to believe in Jesus. He was going up there to imprison and kill people who believed in Jesus. But on the way up, he said, I had this experience. This light knocked me to the ground, and this voice came out and said, Why persecutest thou me? And I said, Who art thou, Lord? Now you got to understand at this time, Paul didn't know who that was up there, did he? But who art thou, Lord? And then the one in heaven said, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. So he's showing them, that's why I changed. I actually talked to him in heaven. Verse 9, and they that were with me beheld indeed the light, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise, and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee all things that are appointed for thee to do. So you get up, you go into Damascus. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. And one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, well reported of by all the Jews that dwelt there. Why did he throw that in? What's that? Credibility. Here it is that the Lord appeared to this guy, one that had a good reputation of all the Jews. See, not some renegade that is up there. So he came unto me, and standing by me said unto me, Brother Saul. Why would he call him brother? Jewish brother. He's trying to show the close relationship in here. Paul was a Jew, so he was a Jewish brother. He said, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And in that very hour I looked upon him, and he said, The God of our fathers hath appointed thee to know his will, and to see the righteous one, and to hear a voice from his mouth. Now, what is it here that Paul said that he had done? He had actually seen Jesus. Is that what he said? Yeah, I've seen him, and I heard the voice from his mouth. So I've talked with him. I've seen him, and I've talked with him. It said, For thou shalt be a witness for him unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. Now, Ananias told Paul, You're going to be a witness. All right, we go back now, pick up our story about witnesses, and it won't take us, 3 seconds? Who were the witnesses? The apostles were witnesses. We established that back at the very beginning. They were witnesses of the fact that Jesus had raised from the dead. Now, you remember back there, when they selected an apostle, he had to fit those qualifications. He had to have been with Jesus from what point? Baptism of John up to the time he ascended up into heaven. See? All the way through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, Paul doesn't have those qualities. And yet Paul can be a witness. Why can Paul be a witness to the resurrection of Christ? He has seen him and talked to him since he raised from the dead. See? I've seen him in heaven. I've talked to him in heaven. I have the record that that's him. I was struck blind. I was healed. When the man said, Receive your sight, that's him. That's not a liar up there. That's Jesus. So Paul could be a witness. That's why he's one of the 12. And so he said in 16, And now, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on his name. So now, why do you wait any longer? Paul, arise, be baptized, calling on his name. Of course, that's what it tells us back in the 9th chapter, that he baptized him there. All right, let's go now to our next chart here, and let's put these passages up here together and take a look at them. Over here is chapter 9, and over there is chapter 22. Now, why would this be longer than this over here? What is chapter 9 about? Luke relating the story, isn't he? What's chapter 22? Who's telling the story? Paul's telling the story. What is it that Paul will leave out? Anything that is not pertinent to his cause, right? And so he's trying to show, I am one of you. All right? As you look up here, you can see, there they are. There it is. You have the same thing. They're stated just a little bit different in there. On that, but you hear the same thing. Now, and the men that journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but beholding or seeing no man. Now, look over here. And they that were with me indeed beheld the light, but they heard not the voice of him. Now, that sure sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? One place Paul said they heard the voice. In another it says they didn't hear the voice. And it appears to be a contradiction. Well, rest easy. There's no contradiction there. And here is the situation, and it really is in the Greek language. Now, in the Greek language, they have a way of saying, I heard the man, and it means I just heard him talk, but I didn't understand him. And they can also say, I heard the man, meaning I understood the man. They had a way of doing that. Now, let's suppose that you went to a big rally up here. The president came to town. You're at a big rally, and you're way back there, quarter of a mile away from him, and he's up there and he's talking. And so you're there. How many times have you ever been in a crowd to where you could hear, you could hear him speaking, you know he's speaking, but you can't understand what he's saying? That ever happened to anybody? Now, if I walked up to you and you're there and you hear this going like this, and I say, can you hear him? What would you say? Can you hear him? Some of you say no. Some of you say, yeah, but I don't understand him, wouldn't you? In other words, when you say, can you hear him? Now, the Greeks had a way of saying that they could hear him, and it just hear, they heard a noise. See? Somebody is talking. But they heard not the voice, and that means they understood not the voice. They didn't understand the language. See? And they had a way of saying it. And that is what each one of these are. Each one of these in the Greek language ends in a different case ending, and so there's no contradiction at all. And I'll tell you this, even the atheist will tell you there's no contradiction here. See, so don't worry about it, and don't say, well, I wonder if Lowell might be stretching a point in here. Even an atheist will look at it and say, nope, there's no contradiction that is in there. Okay, then Saul arose from the earth. When his eyes were open, he saw nothing. They led him into Damascus. And then over here, when I could not see for the glory of the light, I went into Damascus. So he's telling the same story. This up here, he tells it down here. So it's really the same story that's in here. So we finished the story over here then. And over here, he said, for I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. Over here, it said, for thou shalt be a witness for him unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. Now, what caused Paul, when he went out, what caused him to suffer so many things for the name of Jesus? What was it? Was it this over here? See, that's what it was. See, that Jesus is the Christ. And so, you got that in there. Then down here, you see this, and over here says this. Straightway there fell from his eyes the scale. He received his sight, and he rose and was baptized. Over here, why tarriest thou? Rise and be baptized. Now, if you want to get the whole story, what do you have to do? Suppose you want to get all the details. What do you have to do? Put both stories together, and you'll get them. But don't do it just yet, because there's one more time. Paul's going to tell the same story again. And so we'll get it when we get over there. Okay. Now then, he's telling the story here, and doing this. So let's see here. Where am I now? You're down in verse 17. And it came to pass, when I had returned to Jerusalem, and while I prayed in the temple, I fell in a trance, and I saw him saying unto me, Make haste, get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, because they will not receive of thee testimony concerning me. Now, back in chapter 9, you remember the story was a little longer? He went down there, and the Lord told him to get out, and what did Paul say? No, Lord, they'll listen to me. What did the Lord say? You go, see? Well, now, Paul leaves out those little details there, and he says, the Lord talked to me, and the Lord told me to go here, because they'll not receive the testimony. 19. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that I am imprisoned and beat in every synagogue, them that believe on thee. And when the blood of Stephen thy witness was shed, I also was standing by and consenting and keeping the garments of them that slew him. Lord, they all knew this, so certainly I'm the man. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee forth far hence unto the Gentiles. What word in there is almost a curse word? Gentiles. Now, the Lord said, I'm going to take you from the Jews, I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. So look at verse 22. And they gave audience unto this word. So they listened up to this word, up to the time he said Gentiles. And when he said Gentiles, it goes into an uproar. So, unto this word, and they lifted up their voice and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out and threw their garments and cast dust into the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle or prison, bidding that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know for what cause they so shouted against him. So now, the poor old chief captain, you kind of got to feel sorry for this guy, because when he ran down on Paul, they were trying to kill him, weren't they? And he rescued him. He did a good job. He rescued him. And then, just like any good chief of police would do, he turned around and said, what did the guy do? And did he find out? No, they were in an uproar, yelling one thing and the other. So, like any good detective, he puts two and two together. Anybody that causes this much trouble in the city of Jerusalem must be the most wanted man on our list. And who was he? That Egyptian. And so, go throw him in jail. And when Paul goes up, Paul speaks Greek, and he knows the Egyptian doesn't speak Greek. Well, you're not the Egyptian, so then he lets him talk, hoping to find out what is wrong with him. Has he found out what's wrong with Paul? Has Paul admitted to any crime? No. The worst thing that happened was that Paul used that ugly word. They listened until he said that ugly word. What was that ugly word? Gentile. What was the chief captain? A Gentile. That's right. And so comes down here and he says this to the Gentile, and then they just went berserk again. So the guy said, okay, take him in. There's one way in which we can get it out of him. There's a way that doesn't fail. Take him in and scourge him. Take him in and beat him. Beat him until he admits what he did. So they take him in. They tie him up. Getting ready to beat him out of it. So Paul lets them tie him up. This is kind of interesting. It said in verse 25, and when they had tied him up with the thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? Now you can kind of imagine that here they've got Paul tied up, got him all bent over backward, got him tied down in here like this, getting ready to beat him. And Paul looks up to this Roman and says, Is it lawful for you to beat a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? This scared the centurion to death. Why did it scare him to death? That is an unlawful thing. That is the same thing as if a policeman arrested a guy tonight. Suppose he goes out here and he stops somebody. He assumes that the guy's a bank robber. He assumes he's the guy that robbed the bank in Everett yesterday. And so he asked him, "What did you do?" Because I didn't do anything. And so the guy takes him out behind the police car and beats him until he confesses what he did. What would happen to that policeman? That's what is taking place here. Now, our law of innocent until proven guilty comes from the Romans. And it comes from this same thing we're talking about here. Now, if word gets back to Rome that they have even tied him up, getting ready to beat him, they're in trouble. What would happen if that policeman had this guy up here that he thought was a bank robber, didn't know, had him tied up to the back bumper, and had his whip out and getting ready to beat the guy? Somebody walks up on him, and he doesn't get to beat him, but this guy turns him in and says, he had him tied up and was getting ready to beat him. What will happen to that police officer? Well, that's what this centurion is terrified about. So this centurion is no different than I am. Look what he went up and he did in verse 26. When the centurion heard it, he went to the chief captain and told him, saying, "What art thou about to do?" Not what am I about to do, but what are you about to do? Well, you could do that because it is the chief captain's fault, isn't it? But they would all have suffered from this thing. So he's throwing it right back on him. What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman. And the chief captain came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" So the chief captain is all upset. He's scared to death. Are you a Roman? And he said, "Yea." And the chief captain answered, "With a great sum obtained I this citizenship." And Paul said, "But I am a Roman born." Now, are you a Roman? Yes. The chief captain looks at him and says, "Look, I got my Roman citizenship by paying for it with a great sum." Now, it's interesting to study about slavery in Rome and how slaves could buy themselves freedom under certain circumstances, and how slave owners would generally give a slave what we would call an allowance, give him room and board and give him some allowance, and then he saves up all this allowance all of his life, and finally when he gets enough, then he's able to buy his freedom. And what generally happened was that the Roman slave owner, I'm he, so I've got Ryan here, and so I tell Ryan, "Okay, I'm going to give you an extra $20 a month in here of where you can buy your freedom if you so desire." And so I keep giving Ryan this $20. He saves up $20 for the next 30 years. Well, he'd have a good sum of money. Well, Ryan there's 20-something, and 30, that's 55 that he's up there. So he's not quite as active as he used to be. He can't plow my fields quite as good as he used to. So I come to him and say, "Ryan, would you like to buy your citizenship?" And he said, "Yeah, well, it's so much." And so Ryan pays me the money. Now then, I've got the money. I sell Ryan. He gets his citizenship. What can I do with my money now? Go back down to the slave block and buy me a young slave, see? And so it was a business deal with those people. And there are various ways in which you could get it. But if you were a slave and you got your freedom, it cost you a tremendous amount of money. It cost you your life's savings. That's really what you could depend on. Whatever it is that you had saved for your life, you could get it. The centurion says, "I paid that." Paul said, "I was born a Roman citizen." Now, which one would carry the most weight? Somebody born a Roman citizen or somebody who had used to be a slave? And so Paul's Roman citizenship would be a step higher than this. And in verse 29, They then that were about to examine him straightway or immediately departed from him. I can just see this. This centurion, these other guys, tied him up. They just evaporated when they found out that Paul was a Roman citizen. They just evaporated. They didn't have any part in this thing at all. So everybody gets out of there just as fast as they can. And the chief captain also was afraid when he knew that he was a Roman and because he had bound him. So he's scared to death. What's this guy going to do, the chief captain? If you were a chief captain, what would you do? Now, everything he's tried has failed, hasn't it? He's tried to find out what is wrong with the guy. Everything he can't find it out. He's a Roman. He's a free man. He hadn't done anything wrong. But can he release him? No, because the town would just go in an uproar. Can he hold him in jail? No, he can't hold him in jail. What's he going to do? You see. So he's in trouble. Well, he tries something else pretty ingenious. 30. But on the morrow, desiring to know the certainty whereof he was accused of the Jews, he said, there's some way that I can really find out for certain here. He commanded the chief priest and all the council to come down together and brought Paul down and set him before them. So he said, I'll find out one way here. So he says, okay, he commands the chief, the high priest and the council. What they would do, you see, is just this. They would come out here. Here's your priest door. They'd come out, come around, walk up in there, and that's where the court would be held. That is where they are going to go. You see it up in there again, that you'd have it. They would be coming out here and just coming in there and walking up into that council that is up there. Okay, now then, in a minute we'll use this one that's there. Okay, now, we're going to have him to come down. So now then he's standing before the council. The chief captain is standing off in the corner. He's watching this. The council now and the high priest is going to charge him, and now he'll find out what is wrong with him. So Paul, stand up and talk. Well, there's a little something wrong with this to start with, isn't there? I mean, if somebody's brought into a court, and they're going to be tried, are they the first one? Stand up and talk. Charges are brought, aren't they? And then proven, see? But now, Paul, you stand up. So Paul did. And Paul, looking steadfastly on the council, said, Brethren, I have lived before God in all good conscience unto this day. Now, did Paul know any of these guys? He had been in here, if he wasn't on that council, of which he probably was, but if he wasn't, he was in there on a daily basis, because who was in there that he was with? Way back there. Gamaliel, that's right. So he's looking at them, and he said, I have lived before God in all good conscience unto this day. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded that they stood by him, smite him on the mouth. So when he said, I've lived in all good conscience, this high priest said, slap him. So they just turned around and slapped him right across the mouth, like this. Well, Paul looked over, and it shows that it's been a while since he's been in the council in the Jewish regime here, because he didn't recognize the high priest. He didn't know who it was. It had been changed. And so Paul looked at him, and then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. In other words, you hypocrite, you, like a wall that's dirty and filthy, and you just cover up the filth by putting paint on it. That's what you are. You're just a dirty, filthy man that doesn't obey the law, and you wear your clothes and act like that you do. So he said, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, or hypocrite, and settest thou to judge me according to the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? Would the law allow the punishment to be rendered without a guilty verdict? No. So that's what Paul is telling you. Here it is, you're going to set us a judge, and you do this. And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Okay. Are you going to revile or speak evil of God's high priest? And then Paul did a very great thing. He said, I knew not, brethren, that he was high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of a ruler of thy people. Now, is Paul showing them that he respects the law? Yeah, I respect it more than you do, see, that's in here. I wouldn't have done that had I known he was the high priest. See? He obviously didn't have on the high priest robe and so forth, which they didn't wear all the time. They only wore it when they were doing a certain kind of jobs. And so he quotes the law, said, I wouldn't have done that. Now, does Paul know whether he's going to get a fair trial? He knows, doesn't he? And he knows he's not. When Jesus stood before this Sanhedrin, did he get a fair trial? When Stephen stood before the Sanhedrin, did he get a fair trial? Does Paul know all the little tricks and trades? He knows them all, and he knows there is not a chance that he'll get a fair trial. So, look at this ingenious thing that he does. 6. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he knew the council was always made up of Sadducees and Pharisees. But he could look out and he could see, perhaps all of them weren't there, you see, but it wasn't all Sadducees and it wasn't all Pharisees. It was a mixed group who were there, part Sadducees and Pharisees. He cried out in the council. He said, Brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee. Touching the hope of the resurrection of the dead, I am called into question. Now there's what Paul pleads guilty to. That's why I'm here. That's what has caused all the trouble. Because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And who would he specifically be referring to when he's talking about causing all this trouble? The Christ. Jesus rose from the dead. And that's why I'm here. That's why I have all this trouble. It is because I'm a Pharisee and I have that hope of the resurrection. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. I might ask you to hold up your hand if you had forgotten that. Anybody had forgotten that? That's something you can never forget. Okay? Now, they just go into an uproar. Well, does this tell you something about the political atmosphere of the council and how they felt about each other, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and how they hated each other was there? And so just immediately when he said it, then they go into this uproar that's in here. It says, Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great clamor. Now what is clamor? Ephesians 4 said we're not supposed to do it. It's what? Uproar. It's an uproar, yelling. It's yelling. Ryan and I get in an argument. I say, Ryan, I don't think that's right. He said, well, I think it is. I don't think so. He said, well, I'm sure it is. Well, I know better. In other words, I'm going to win by my vote. I'm clamoring when you do that. And so it was a yelling situation that you've got going here. And some of the scribes of the Pharisees' part stood up and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man. They're ready to pass judgment, aren't they? I mean, this man agrees with us. We don't find any evil in this man. And what if a spirit has spoken to him or an angel? What if he did hear something from heaven? So what? That's what we believe. We believe there's angels. We believe there's spirits. But what about the Pharisees? Oh boy, see, this is something. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should be torn in pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the castle or the prison. Now, in this courtroom, the chief of police is sitting back here, and here is this uproar, and how bad was it? The chief of police was afraid Paul might be ripped into pieces. They were both ripping on him and pulling and And he's afraid that he's going to be ripped into pieces. And so he tells his soldiers, go rescue the guy. So they go rescue him. Well, this is the third time Paul's had to be rescued here, isn't it, in 2 days? When he was down there in a temple, why they were trying to kill him, the chief police got him on the temple steps. They all went in an uproar, and they had to carry him on in. Now then, they go in the most dignified judicial body on the face of the earth, the Supreme Court of the Jewish nation, and then they have to rescue him again because he's afraid he's going to be torn into pieces. Mm-hmm.
Are these Jews here only are they separate the Sadducees and Pharisees in Jerusalem? The reason I'm asking that is because everywhere else he causes uproar and they don't side with them. One side doesn't side with the other. My question is, they side with Paul here, the other times they don't. Other Jews in other cities he causes uproar because he believes in each side. So is there Pharisees in other cities?
Yeah, Pharisees and Sadducees in other cities.
What is the difference?
But the difference is most of your Sadducees are in Jerusalem. Sadducees are the upper crust, politically minded, moneyed people who are interested in that aspect of life. When Jesus was here, the Sadducees only confronted him a couple of times. They only really came and confronted him one time, or big time. And that is when they were going to prove there was no resurrection. And they came and asked him, he said, let's ask you a question. If a man dies and he doesn't have any children, and then his brother marries his wife, and then he dies and his brother marries, and 7 of them, when in the after a while, whose wife will she be? In other words, they think they have a puzzle. You see, there's Sadducees. So Sadducees pretty well stayed aloof from stuff like this because they were more interested in the money aspect of the thing. But here they couldn't because it's divided. The Sanhedrin is divided. Okay. Now then, got him back in jail. Now what are we going to do with the guy? We still can't turn him loose. And what can be done? Well, he has a problem. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, for as thou hast testified concerning me at Jerusalem, so must thou also bear witness at Rome. So, for the second time, the Lord appears to Paul. The Lord's going to appear to Paul 3 times during his life. Do you remember the other time he appeared to Paul and told him, be of good cheer? Everything's going to be all right. I have much people in this city. Nobody's going to set on you to hurt you. In the city of Corinth. What chapter would you find that in if it's in the city of Corinth? Chapter 18. Okay, now here again then, it appears that there's no way out, but the Lord appears to him and says, be of good cheer, don't worry. I want to send you to Jerusalem. You're going to Jerusalem, and you're going to testify and bear witness of me up there, just like you have in Jerusalem. Okay, 12. And when it was day, the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they'd killed Paul. Are they mad? These Jews are mad, aren't they? So here's a curse. We'll not eat or drink till we've killed Paul. And they were more than 40 that had made this conspiracy. So more than 40 of them got together and did this. And they came to the chief priests and the elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse to taste nothing until we've killed Paul. Now who did they go to? The chief priest and the elders. Is that the body that you ought to go to if you were going to make a plan to kill somebody? You wouldn't think so. What do these 40 men know about the chief priest and these elders? Yeah, they'll take a bribe. Have they ever taken a bribe before? Have they ever had a payoff? Have they ever done anything in a backward way to get a guy? They ever pay 30 pieces of silver to get a friend to turn on Jesus, then throw the silver back at him? Same group. So they know we can go up and we can tell them. So here's what we're going to do. we're going up, and so they tell the chief priest or the captain, or the elders here, in here, said, now therefore do you with the council signify, I want you to do this, signify to the chief captain that he bring him down to you as though you would judge of his case more exactly. And we, before he comes near, are ready to slay him. So here's what we want you to do now. So now, we've got this picture up here of where it was that they went in there. Now then, we're down, and it's going to be just a reverse. Now then, we want you to send over and have him brought out of here over to our council chambers, and then we will judge him more exactly. See? Well, what's going to happen on the road from that gate to that gate? These 40 guys are laying there, and they're going to kill him. So, plans are laid. But Paul's sister's son, how would he be related in our terminology? The nephew. Paul's nephew heard of their lying in wait, and he came and entered into the castle or the prison and told Paul. So he goes in to visit with Paul and tells him what's going to happen. And Paul called unto him one of the centurions and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he has something to tell him. So centurion takes Paul's nephew, takes him to the chief captain, the chief of police. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and saith, Paul the prisoner called me unto him, asked me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say to thee. And the chief captain took him by the hand, and going aside, asked him privately. Now this is something, again, I think shows you a little bit about the chief captain. And here's this kid, and he goes up. How would a kid feel? Knows Uncle Paul's going to get killed. To go into the mightiest Roman in the city, how would he be feeling? So he goes up there, and what does the chief captain do to him? Takes him by the hand and leads him aside. I think that's a nice gesture, don't you? Takes him by the hand, leads him aside, gets him out of the way of other people so that it's not there in an embarrassing way. And he said, what is it that thou hast to tell me? Very, very nice to him. And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask thee to bring down Paul tomorrow unto the council, as though thou wouldst inquire somewhat more exactly concerning him. But do not therefore yield unto them, for there lie in wait of them more than 40 men, who have bound themselves under a curse, neither to eat nor drink, till they have slain him, and now they are ready, looking for the promise from thee. So they're going to ask you to do this. Don't do it, or you're going to get killed right outside. Now, what would happen to the chief of police? You got a big uproar in Jerusalem. His job is to keep the peace. And it ends up that Paul gets killed right there on the temple grounds. How's that going to look at Rome? See, from Rome's viewpoint. And so the chief captain looks at this. He, of course, is politically minded, but he sounds like a good guy to me. And so he's not going to let them do it. So 22, the chief captain let the young man go charging him. Tell no man that thou hast signified these things to me. Don't you tell anybody what you've said to me. And he called unto him 2 of the centurions and said, make ready 200 soldiers. Why would he call 2 centurions to make ready 200 soldiers? A centurion is over how many? 100. Now, he said, I want you to get these 2 centurions and make ready 200 soldiers to go as far as Caesarea. Here, we want to go up to Caesarea. Then, in addition to that, and horsemen 70, 70 horsemen, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. So I want 200 soldiers, 200 spearmen, 70 horsemen, and get ready to leave at what time? 9 o'clock tonight. You're going to travel through the night. We're going to get Paul out of town before this plot is carried out tomorrow. So, do you think he has enough? He's going to make sure that Paul gets out of town and gets up there. So he has all of these guys. 24. And he bade them provide the beast that they might set Paul thereon. So get Paul a beast because you've got to get up there. Having him safe, therefore, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. So now, they're going to bring him up to Caesarea, and that's where Governor Felix lives. Now keep in mind, Caesarea is the headquarters, it's the Roman headquarters of this whole area. Jerusalem is not the Roman headquarters. Caesarea is the Roman headquarters. So the big governors, they will live in Caesarea. They will have their chief of police and their other people out into these other areas. But they will live in Caesarea. They will come down to Jerusalem. Herod had himself a palace built down in Jerusalem, so he could go back and forth, but mainly he lived up in Caesarea. It was a great coastal town, a great place to live. And so that's where he lived most of the time. Pilate, he was down in Jerusalem some, but he also lived up in Caesarea. So Felix is up there in Caesarea. He's the Roman governor. And so now we're going to get this guy up there to stand before this Roman governor. So it said he wrote a letter after this form. So here's what he said. Claudius Lysis, unto the most excellent governor Felix, greeting. This is about the way Paul wrote his letter, isn't it? You see? I, Paul, unto the church at Ephesus, peace be unto you. This is the way that they wrote letters back in those first century times. So, Claudius Lysis, unto the most excellent governor Felix, greeting. This man was seized by the Jews, and was about to be slain of them, when I came upon them with soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Uh-oh. There's just a little something wrong there, isn't there? When did he learn he was a Roman? When he was about to get in trouble, he was scared to death. Now, this is the... This proves political spinning. This is really the only bad thing you can find about this guy. And I suppose in the political realm this is permissible, huh? This is laying the good side on the political aspect of it. So I went down there, and I learned this man's a Roman, so boy, I ran in and I grabbed him, and got him out of there. And desiring to know the cause whereof they accused him, I brought him down unto their council. So I got their council to come, whom I found to be accused about questions of their law, but have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or bonds. So what is it the chief captains found out he's accused of? What was the problem? He was accused of something. What was the problem? Paul told him, he said, here's what I'm accused of. Here's my problem. I believe in a resurrection. And when he said that, they went into an uproar. And they started arguing about this. Do you see why the chief captain would say they're arguing about things of their law? See? Of whether there's a resurrection or not here? Now, and by the way, would the chief captain look at Paul as a Christian separate and apart from the Jews, or would he look at him as a Jew? It would be as a Jew. You see that he would be looking at him here. So he said, he's not guilty of anything worthy of death or bonds. And when it was shown unto me that there would be a plot against this man, I sent him to thee forthwith, charging his accusers also to speak against him before thee. So I'm sending him up to you tonight. I'm sending them up to you. And so you will be having the Jewish council to come up there, and then you can determine what the problem is with this guy. So the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antiparis. As you can see there, that's halfway up. They get him up there. And on the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him and return to the castle. So the 400 soldiers returned back. They left 70 horsemen to go with him to keep him there. But of course, he's far enough up now that nobody's going to catch him. And they, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when he had read it, he asked of what province he was. He said, "What province are you from, Paul?" And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, "I will hear thee fully," said he, "when thine accusers also are come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's palace. Yes. No. No, he's going to spend 2 years up here in Caesarea in jail. Yeah. Okay, so he finds out he's from Cilicia. In other words, wants to make sure he's in my territory, see. It'd be like somebody going over here today and they say, "Where are you from?" And you say, "Well, I'm from Vancouver." You say, "Which one?" If it's Canada, you're out of my territory. If it's not, then you're in. So Cilicia was a Roman province, and so he said, "I will hear you then when your accusers are come." Yes. What's this? No. He's kept in Herod's palace. Herod, old mean Herod the Great, had built a great palace in Caesarea. In fact, Herod the Great had built Caesarea. Now, he had built Caesarea before Christ was born. He built Caesarea back in about, I forget now what it was, 20 years before Christ was born. It was a grand city. It had all of the great things about it. It was there. He had a great harbor built out there where ships could come in from all over the world and unload. It would hold hold 100 ships. Each ship would hold 600 tons and 100 people, and so it's a big thing. He had a theater there. He had all kind of good stuff. And then he had a temple built there to Caesar, and then he built himself a palace. Now, his palace at Jerusalem is just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it would take, I don't know how many Bill Gates houses to touch the one in Jerusalem. It was just mind-boggling. And the one in Caesarea would have been greater than that down there. So it's a big thing. But Herod had this great palace that's up there. Now again, when it's translated palace, that sounds like a good place to live. I'd like to go live in a palace, wouldn't you, Herod's palace? But what does it actually mean? What would Herod have in that palace? What did he have in the Antonio fortress? This a jailhouse, see? And so they took him to Herod's palace, put him in the part of it that was the jailhouse. So Paul's in jail at Caesarea. Okay, next week we pick up our story, and he's going to be then standing court, and this time it will be a legitimate Roman court. A legitimate Roman court. Up to now, it's been in a mob when the Jews were trying to kill him. It's been to the Jews standing before the Sanhedrin. Now then, we're going to come before a Roman court, and the Jews will accuse, and Paul will defend, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, Dave?
How long has it been since Paul was on the road to Damascus till now?
Since he was on the road to Damascus. He was on the road to Damascus about 37 A.D., 37, 38 A.D., and now it is about 60, it'd be about 62 A.D. So what, 37 and 62. Somebody that can subtract can figure that out. So 25 years then. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. A lot of changes to be made in 25 years. And especially, see, he didn't know that high priest. So he hadn't been there to know him. And at this time, the high priesthood was bought and sold. You'd buy it off of the Roman governments, and things had just gone to the dogs. It was just a terrible situation. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. Well, it changed in the last year. Did I say a 5-year imprisonment? Well, if I said that, I was wrong. I wasn't thinking I was asleep. I was, whatever it is. It's 2 years in Caesarea, 2 years in there up at Rome, and then he'll be thrown in again. So I don't know, I may have said total 5 or something, but he'll be thrown in for a final time, and then that'll be the time that he gets killed. But the 4-year imprisonment is where it is. Oh, the chapter headings for 22 is going to be Paul's defense before the council. And not before the council. Paul's defense before the Jews. 23, Paul's defense before the council. So it'd just be the Jewish mob you see in 22. 23 is the council. Yeah. 22 and what? 22 and 20. And when the blood of Stephen, thy witness, was shed. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's go back to verse 19. And I said, Lord. See, Paul is talking to the Lord at this time. So he's telling the Jews, here's what I did. I was there, and I said, Lord, they themselves know, let's see, that in every synagogue that believed on thee, and when the blood of Stephen, thy witness, was shed, in other words, I'm talking to the Lord, when the blood of Stephen, thy witness, what did Stephen see when he looked up? You remember? He saw him standing on the right hand up there. So he was a witness in that sense. So it wouldn't be talking about one of the 12, but because he just died immediately afterwards. There might be an argument if Stephen had lived 20 years. You know, Stephen could go out and say, I am also a witness to this. But he died immediately after. So that witness there is what he actually saw. And what did he tell them when he looked up? See, I see him standing. See? And so he was a witness to them at that point. Okay, anything else? Any tests that haven't been turned in?